Well, it looks like we've got a number of participants in, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar topic. Really going to be focusing on how to avoid CSA roadblocks. So my name is Nick Hillesheim. I'm the Chief Sales Officer here at TVC ProDriver, and I'm joined by Steve Wilhelms, who is our new Director of Safety and Compliance at TVC ProDriver. I'm going to pass it over to Steve real quick, just to introduce himself, and then I'll cover the bullet points that we're going to talk about and some housekeeping items, and then we'll get into the conversation. Steve.
Thanks, Nick. Steve Wilhelms. I've been in the safety and compliance and risk space for go on 29 years. About half that time spent with motor carriers, and the other half spent with some very good service providers, and have basically since 2007 lived in the CSA world when it was back to CSA 2010, and it was just in Colorado. Started out, and so over the span of from when it became live, all the way through all the changes and proposed changes and the FAST Act and the not changes, have been knee deep in CSA with a couple of different major CSA providers in the past, and have kind of lived that life for the past 10 or 15 years.
Awesome. Well, sounds good. Well, thanks for the intro, Steve, and really appreciate you jumping on here to talk about some of the stuff. So just a quick, some quick housekeeping. If you guys have questions throughout, feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them as we go through the discussion here. But we'll also have time at the end for Q&A. But without all that being said, so really wanted to talk about the talking points that we're going to cover here. So, we're going to start things off with your score still matters. So, really looking at, why CSA still matters. And then we'll get into the basics where we're talking about measures versus percentiles. And then, the difference between warnings versus citations. And then how to use vehicle maintenance violations to save money on repair costs. And then we'll wrap things up with, why so many hours of service violations with ELDs. So we're really talking about form and manner and, how we can prevent some of those things with ELDs. But with all that being said, Steve, I'm going to, kick things off on why your score still matters. So if you just mind talking about, some of the highlights on the importance of CSA and why that still matters.
Yeah, Nick, thanks. And so, a few years ago, and it actually happened over a weekend, the your basic scores, and percentiles went blank, right? Went dark to the public. However, everybody thought that was going to grant a little relief, but it really doesn't, because what we found to be true is that for a lot of shippers, brokers, they want to see your private CSA scores, the ones that you as a motor carrier can log in and get as either part of a contract or, part of just being able to get freight. So they're still out there. And we also know that, the insurance companies, right? The insurance companies look at them. CSA was never meant to be an underwriting tool. But in about 2011, when we had a good couple of years of solid data, that's when insurance companies, especially underwriters, started, in my opinion, like taking shortcuts instead of doing, full on-site visits. They were looking at CSA scores, right? And CSA scores as they existed then, we're using that and really heavily weighting their underwriting. And that practice is still happening today. So we see that, hey, I've got the 3 basics in alert status and my insurance company only tells me 2, or the shipper says, if I get 3, I'm on probation, they'll only give me over freight. And I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced something similar to that, right? The problem with that is basically, we all know that CSA is not a solid proven methodology based on the fact that Congress actually mandated that the feds take a look at it. And so that's the company effect that it has, is that it affects so many things other than just can you get freight or not.
Yeah, and then there's a whole nother aspect as it relates to drivers, right? Because drivers have their own CSA, and that can have an impact not only on the driver but also on the company as well, correct?
So, for most of you probably know that the motor carrier's CSA score follow them for 24 months. It's a roll off in 24 months with a extending multiplier through that 24-month period. Drivers, however, their history stays with them for 36 months. Now, the way you get that obviously is through a PSP. If you're not using PSP, I would highly recommend that, you take a look at that. My experience has been, I would probably say about 60% of the motor carriers utilize PSP in some form or fashion. But
Steve, what is PSP?
So basically the PSP report is the driver's report card on CSA. So
Okay.
just like the company has their report card, when you go in and look at your basic measures in SMS, this is every inspection or crash that the driver has been involved in with multiple carriers, within the past 3 years. So it all links to his CDL versus where the company links to its DOT number.
Makes sense. So I mean, as you look at, some of the things that, TVC Pro Driver has to offer, where, we're fighting citations and, helping reduce or dismiss. How great of an impact does that have on the driver's CSA score? And, and in turn, like, how does that impact the company? So, if you just mind talking about, some of the importance of having that type of service.
Yeah. So great question, Nick. The thing that, so in the regulations is that if you have a citation that's issued in conjunction with a violation, an inspection that goes to a violation, and there is a citation issued, right? Then if that citation is fought in court, if it is dismissed, and sometimes even if it's just downgraded to a different charge, you can data queue that, and it can be removed from your CSA score, right? Which then it comes off, your SMS history, right? So you're not accumulating those points. So the one thing about that is to, if you get one of those citations, is to not rush to the courthouse and pay it real quick, right? Because you've got to, if you do that, then the chances of getting a good data queue are very slim. But to use someone, attorney of service like TVC to be able to fight that, citation, and then we've got a really good chance at getting it removed through the data queue process.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. So just moving on to the next topic. So, looking at the basics, and, just would like you to talk about the measures versus percentiles and the impact that has.
Right. So the basic measures, and when they started hiding, what your measure was, there's a threshold in each one of the basics, and there's different algorithms or calculations that, calculate what that threshold is. When they put the basic percentiles, they hid the percentiles from the public and put the measures out there. Well, there's really no way that you can take measures that's in the public view and calculate that into what you would see if you were looking at your own information, right? So if you're on the call and you are a broker, you're an insurance person, you're a safety person, and you're just looking at the public view, you cannot, I don't care how you try, it's a very complicated formula to be able to take one and calculate it into the other to be able to see. It's almost impossible. That's where companies have tried and they get close. There's some companies that, say they can do that, and we've looked at those numbers, and, they're just, they're close in a few categories, but because of the different percentiles and in each basic threshold is, the calculations vary so much.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense, and I mean, so it's key to to continue to follow this stuff, right? So, so moving on to the next topic, and I mean, this comes up often, Steve. I mean, we hear this from a lot of our customers, and I just hear it just out in the industry. Warnings versus citations, and the impact that the warning can have versus a citation. So do you mind talking about, the importance of, understanding the warning versus citation and some of the benefits of getting a citation over a warning, and vice versa?
Yeah. So when CSA first came out, many still do it to this day, whether they're, civilian inspectors or whether they are, law enforcement, roadside commercial motor vehicle inspectors. They try to kind of ease the, I guess, ease the tension with the driver, saying, hey, you're not getting a ticket, you're just getting a warning. Well, and that I just had that conversation earlier today with a client, and drivers don't understand. So I would basically, one of the takeaways today, I would say for anybody that's on the call, is discuss with your drivers. When he says you're just getting a warning, there's something still attached to it. There's a paper trail, right? And the paper trail has numbers that affect not only the company, but they affect you as a driver. So it's kind of the officer being not confrontational and saying, hey, I'm cutting you a break, I'm just giving you warnings, but there's still CSA scores, right? I would preferably rather have a citation, at least so I have a chance at fighting it. Right now, as we see, I mean, we've seen some violations recently just in house where people have been doing, 14 over 14 in a construction zone, and they didn't get a citation for it, and it's like, okay, what was this guy thinking? Well, you look at the inspection and it was signed by a sergeant. Well, the sergeant doesn't want to go to court, right?
Yep.
And so that may be some of the reasons. And in all fairness to our partners in law enforcement, right? In all fairness, they're short staffed. They don't want to go to court. They don't want to write tickets. I don't really think it's a way of them, making their CSA violation stick. It's just they don't have time. They don't want to go to court. They're out there, and like every other company in the world, they're short staffed. Right.
Yeah.
But it does put us at a disadvantage when it does come to challenging CSAs. We're a lot more successful in data queues when we have a citation attached to it.
Steve, is there anything a fleet can do or a driver can do, like as far as, hey, I got a warning. Can I ask that officer to write me a citation? I mean, is there anything that, that they can do to, really help that out?
Well, you can always ask, and some of them will look at you and say, are you on drugs? Or you've been drinking? What's the problem? And then other ones will just outright refuse. But there have been cases where people have said, hey, listen, if you're going to stop me for doing 6 to 10 over, write me a ticket for doing 6 to 10 over.
Yeah.
And they'll say, okay, we'll do it. But
yeah,
it really has to do with two things, Nick. It has to do with if the department has a policy, and if the department has a policy on what they do and do citations, and the attitude of the driver and the attitude of the officer, right? That's what it comes down to, right? So, and then while we're on that, just one thing is kind of a sidebar conversation, is knowing the difference between states that are probable cause states and states that are not. And what I mean by that, in that description is, so in several states, matter of fact, the majority of the states, probably about, well, I would say 35 of them, if you are a certified commercial motor vehicle inspector, right, and certification, you can stop a commercial motor vehicle, and I'll say this tongue in cheek, you can stop a commercial motor vehicle if you just want to look and see what color the steering wheel is, right? In the non-probable cause states. In the states that are probable cause means that you have to have an observed offense, like this speeding. Many times we see the speeding 1 to 5 over, well, that's, most of those are in non-probable cause states, or in probable cause states, because they have to have a reason to pull that commercial motor vehicle over. And what's happened over the course of CSA maturing is that they're now being required by their department to write that reason for the stop, to document that probable cause as the 1 to 5 over or the 6 to 10 over. I mean, as most officers, and probably any of you guys have been stopped before in your personal vehicles or even a truck, they're not going to write you a ticket for doing 1 to 5 over. They're probably not even going to stop you. There's probably another reason, right? In that 6 to 10 over. But it's important that you know what the probable cause states are and what they're not, which ones are not. And there's also some caveats that go with some of the states as well. And that's the difference between whether you have only the state agency that can enforce commercial motor vehicle rules, like Arkansas Highway Police are the only ones that can do that, versus the Arkansas State Police, which is totally different. They can't even enforce commercial motor vehicle rules, right? Has to be the Arkansas Highway Police. In other states, you have kind of the same thing, but you also have, like in the state of Texas, we have what's called MCSAP agencies, and that's Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program. That's what the acronym is for, but it's basically city government, county government, enforcement agencies that have trained by the state. They become certified commercial motor vehicle inspectors, and they can stop a commercial motor vehicle and inspect it just like the state agencies can. If you go down around Houston, Texas, there's probably about 80 MCSAP agencies in the in ports and stuff like that, right? Others are kind of limited, but so it's really important to know who can write citations and who can't, and if it's a probable cause state or if it's not.
That makes a lot of sense. The other thing, I think would be important to talk about. So, and I think this happens, right, where a citation is written. And so if a driver just, pays for that fine, I mean, they're automatically pleading guilty to that fine, correct? So, I guess, best practice, Steve, I don't know if you want to talk about best practices as it relates to like when a driver actually receives a citation, what are some of those steps that they should take?
Yeah. So, Nick, most of the companies have a policy that if you get a citation, you need to notify someone in safety or management immediately, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the communication with the driver becomes. Now, the driver will sometimes want to hide that citation from you, right? And when it's accompanied with a roadside inspection, you're going to learn about it sooner or later. So the best thing is play defense before while you still have a chance, and to notify your company. And there's a couple of options too. You don't want to plead guilty. You also don't want to plead no contest, right? Which is another one. You want to actually fight that citation. And that's where our advantage comes in, is we're actually using attorneys that are in the jurisdictions where you get that citation. So the driver doesn't have to go back there. He doesn't have to, worry about hiring somebody online that advertises all over the country. It's just one of those things that we're using people who know the courts and the court systems in the jurisdiction where you have to, and it's pretty quick. That's the one thing as well, is you usually have about maybe maximum of 10 days to contact the court to either request a court date. So the quicker that we can get that information, the better off the driver is, the better off the company is.
Yeah. And I mean, so it sounds like it all boils down to communication. As long as you have that communication with your drivers and they understand, hey, these are the appropriate steps to take if you do get a citation, then it seems like it's, really a seamless process where we can, turn that over. If they're a TVC member, we can turn that over and have, our network of attorneys, really go after and fight that citation. And to your point, Steve, I think, that's one of the great things about the way that TVC Pro Driver is set up is, being in that jurisdiction, it allows us to, we understand that court system in that location. So our reduction or dismissal of those citations is has a very good track record of success.
Yeah, it is. And the one thing that I didn't mention is I do have a law enforcement background. And so I know about writing tickets, dealing with city prosecutors and, stuff. And even to get a charge lowered to a different offense, right, where we still have a good chance at CVSA, that's a win for both sides. It's the way the courts look at it, right? The prosecutor gets a little something, the driver gets a little less of something, and it's a win-win on both sides. It's a tick mark for both teams, right? And so that's why it's so important to get out in front of it instead of waiting until pleading guilty or pleading no contest and sending in a fine. I mean, the motor carrier is going to find out sooner or later. So
Yeah.
you need to get on top of it. You're exactly.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Well, moving on to the next topic, and I think this is a really good topic. But how you can leverage vehicle maintenance violations to save money on repair costs. So I'd really like to understand, Steve. Keeping your truck in good condition and the type of impact that can have on because you mentioned just being pulled over in certain states. They don't really need a reason, but if they see a beat up truck, chances are that truck is going to get pulled over versus, the nice, clean, shiny truck that looks like it's got, all of its parts. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, vehicle maintenance and the impact that has.
Yeah. And this is where, I'm going to try not to get on a soapbox here, but it's really about holding your drivers accountable, right? I mean, you look at, last year alone, the highest vehicle maintenance, this year to date, so far there have been over 293,000 violations issued for inoperable required lamp. So,
wow.
And we know that in different states, and they call it disparate enforcement, but we know different states look for different things. In Texas, it's brakes, lights, and tires. In Indiana, it's speeding, right? So we know by the number of violations and where they're issued. But, that's a lot just this year to date, right? So it comes basically down to, three things: pre-trip, post-trip, and making sure you, perform your periodic or annual inspections. And that's, in the vehicle or on the vehicle, right? But what it really comes down to is, holding your drivers accountable, because some of these things are blatantly obvious. Some of them are, should have discovered in a pre-trip or a post-trip inspection. A couple of years ago, they did, give you an option if you didn't have a defect on your post-trip that you didn't have to complete a DVIR. I would highly recommend that if you're having problems in the vehicle maintenance area, you make a driver complete a DVIR for every day he's on that truck. And then you check those DVIRs for any defects, which he may not have noted. We used to call it pencil whipping. Now it's button pushing because it's all on an ELD, right? And then compare that against the roadside inspection and look and see if he's got 90 days worth of DVIRs and there was nothing ever wrong with a trailer or tractor. I want that truck and trailer because that's the best one that's on the road anywhere in the world, right? But we all know that's not true. They're just not paying attention. And so that costs you time and money. And, we all know that safety is not a profit center, right? There's a cost involved to safety and compliance. But this is one place. This is the one place out of all this where we can actually control our expense. Because to fix a steer tire that's less than 430 seconds while it's at the shop in the yard versus having it done roadside after you've been put out of service, it's almost twice the price. Plus you have, late, customer satisfaction, late deliveries. You may have to repower the load. I mean, the cost of just that tire is minimal compared to the trickle effect it could have.
Right.
So that's where, you just have to, and we all know, I've dealt with, when I got into the business, I dealt with 1,500 owner operators on a daily basis, right? So we all know the fight, whether it's owner operators or it's an asset-based fleet, but, it's a struggle every day. But it's one of those things that you have an opportunity to increase or to decrease your cost associated with vehicle maintenance and increase your uptime on your vehicles, not sitting on the side of the road in a place where, you're waiting 3 hours on a road service.
That's right. Yeah. And before we move on to the next topic, Steve, I think it's, good to, maybe point out, like, what are some things, like creative things that you've seen fleets do to really incentivize drivers to do their pre-trip, their post-trip inspections, and actually do them effectively versus pencil whipping?
So, one of the things that fleets do, obviously, the pre-trip, you don't have to document, right? The post-trip, yes, there's a DVIR, there's a form. I would make them fill that form out every day, regardless of, like I said before, regardless of if there's a violation or not. But then also, a lot of fleets have gone to compensating drivers for clean inspections, right? And I've seen that number be as low as $50, $25, as high as $200 to $300, based on, the revenue of the company and how they're doing, and then how bad they want to, or how much they want good inspections.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and it's about time, right? It's all about time. The drivers are thinking, if the wheels aren't turning, we're not making money. But if you're stuck on the side of the road, they're going to be turning a whole lot less.
That's right. Well, now, I mean, great points there, Steve. So we've got about 4 minutes left, but so I just want, to be brief on this last topic, but, really looking at, how to decrease form and manner type violations. I mean, we all know, like with ELD, that shouldn't happen, but there's a reason why that's still happening. So what are some ways that, that drivers and fleets can, really help reduce that?
Well, when ELDs came into play, Nick, I mean, basically the only thing that the roadside inspectors could really write, we do see 11 and 14-hour violations, but the only thing that they could really concentrate on was the form and manner violations, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, if you're a fleet that utilizes a TMS system, make sure your TMS system is uploading the data to your ELD system, if that's an option that you have, right? From both providers. That way it gets the truck number in there, the bill of lading number, the trailer number, all of that stuff is uploaded in there that's required, just like you're filling out a paper log, right? The second thing is that, and this is a change, this actually changed from the original violation policy, is, the instruction card. So the laminated instruction card, right? Well, one of the things that have changed just in the past couple of years is you do not have to have that laminated instruction card anymore, as long as the driver can demonstrate on the ELD where the instruction tab is and display that for the officer roadside. So that's one of the things that if you get a violation for that, you really need to question that driver is, hey, did he just ask you for the card, or did he ask you to show it to you, on the ELD? That's one of the things we've been successful at data queuing, right? So those are the things. Make sure that, and hey, if you have to hand enter it, because that's the only thing they can write in the hours of service category, which, vehicle maintenance is the number one violation written, when you combine them all. There's 400 different violation category codes for vehicle maintenance, right? And then the second one is hours of service. I mean, those are the two that we see the most. So, and I would say that, for most of you guys, that's probably the two that, are the highest in your basics. So, that's a couple of ways to deal with that.
Well, and I mean, it really sounds like it comes down to like coaching and training, so that driver understands, hey, this is how I access certain things and I can demonstrate, so it's probably good practice, before you send it, because we all know, like, there's different ELD systems out there, and, one fleet uses one ELD and the next fleet uses a different ELD, so that driver might not be as familiar with those systems. So, before they leave out on the road, it's important for them to demonstrate, like, hey, I can actually show how to get to this, this site that or this portion of the ELD that shows the instructions on how to do everything.
Yeah, exactly right. And along with how to enter, like multiple trailer numbers, if you're just doing dropping hooks all day and things like that, right? Because that's where we see a lot of it. Didn't enter trailer number, or, well, because he had 3 different loads and it's like 4 screens deep into an ELD, right?
Yeah.
So if your TMS isn't loading that, you've got to know how to go in there and do it. If not, that's where we see a lot of violations as well.
Excellent. Well, so we've got, we can stick around for a few minutes yet for Q&A. But I mean, if you folks do have questions, Kara, if you mind pulling up the slide here with Steve's contact information, would love to have you, reach directly out to Steve. And, he's an expert when it comes to all things CSA. So I mean, if you have specific questions or just want to bounce something off of him, Steve is more than happy to help out.
Absolutely.
So we'll give it a couple minutes here. If anybody has questions, feel free to type it in the chat. Yeah, so there, I mean, if you guys do want, want to follow up, I mean, here's Steve's information. But I mean, if you want a direct follow-up, put your information in the chat. We'd be happy to follow up with you here after this call. Well, Steve, I mean, doesn't appear that there's a bunch of questions coming in here. So, really appreciate you jumping on and talking through stuff. Looks like we've got one that came in from Doris. So the question here is, which inspection is mandatory, pre-trip or post-trip, Steve?
The post-trip, the DVIR, they're both mandatory, but the DVIR has to be documented, right? That's what most people flag a pre-trip inspection on their logs, usually 7 to 15 minutes. That's what we've always seen, right? Going back to the 15-minute increments on the old paper logs, right? Both of them are required, but the one that requires the documentation is the DVIR on the post-trip inspection. And that's a great question. That's a great question, Doris. Yeah.
And it's good practice to do both, right, Steve?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, even if you're, you go to sleep at the truck stop, you get up the next morning, something could be dripping, something along those lines. So yes, absolutely. Pre-trip will start your day off, making sure that you've got a safe vehicle to go down the road in.
So question came in, how do you get rid of a license suspension on my 86?
So license suspensions due to not having a medical cert on file, that's something that you have to contact the state driver's licensing bureau, or they go by different titles, DMV, whatever, depending upon the state, right? There is, hopefully next year that will be seamless, but it's it's all up to the feds communicating with the states and that type of thing. So that's actually something that's not a data queue, but it is it's something that we can help with, obviously, from our legal team. But it's also, if you want to try to do it on your own, you have to go through the state driver's licensing agency.
And then one more question came in, Steve. So can you talk about the new false log violation? Is that an out of service violation?
So on the false log violations, it depends on it basically depends on how many violations or what your previous 7 days are, right? Are you out of hours? Is it a false log? There's a lot of discussion going on right now within the CVSA, the authority there. There's a very in-depth discussion that will continue next month. Is that if a false log is issued and you've had a 32-hour or you've had a 34-hour restart since that false log, should that be out of service or should it not? And that is a discussion that actually in a committee meeting took up an entire day amongst the law enforcement officials, and they were split amongst law enforcement and enforcement officials right down the middle. Is that yes, the rule says he should be false log, he should be out of service for 34 hours. The other one is no, put him out of service for 8 or write him a citation for being over hours and let him go. But that is something that we'll hear more from CVSA about after the September meeting. And obviously those all comments go straight to the FMCSA as well.
Excellent. And Steve, I think it might be good. So we send out our monthly newsletter. So after that meeting, I mean, if things transpire from that meeting, to be able to communicate that in our newsletter, as well as any other important information, for our customers to see. Yeah, no, yeah, I'm part of the policy and regulatory committee there, and so anything that is news breaking or even things that are being discussed, yeah, we definitely should include those in our newsletter. Awesome. Well, it doesn't appear that there's any additional questions here. So thank you, folks. Really appreciate you jumping on. And Steve, really appreciate you, diving into some of the details around some of these subjects. But with that, we will send out the recording to anybody that registered, so you'll be able to access the recording again. But again, if you have additional questions, you saw the contact information, feel free to reach out at any time. We're happy to assist. But with that, everybody have a great day. Thank you. Thank you.